The palace of the Louvre shimmered under the candlelight, but within its corridors lurked shadows far darker than the night outside. In the mid-16th century, beneath the glitter of jewels and silk, Queen Catherine de Medici ruled with eyes that missed nothing. Her smile was soft, her silence terrifying. France was her chessboard, and every noble, every priest, every lover, a pawn. Born in Florence in 1519, Catherine came from the infamous Medici line, bankers, patrons, and poisoners. The blood that ran through her veins was rich with cunning and survival. Orphaned young, raised in the intrigues of Italian courts, she learned early that power had no conscience. She studied alchemy, astrology, and the darker sciences hidden behind locked monastery doors. When she married Henry, the Duke of Orléans, few thought the quiet Italian girl would matter. France was proud and suspicious of foreign queens. But Catherine watched and waited. She observed the language of betrayal, how courtiers smiled while planning each other's ruin. When Henry became king, she began her slow, deliberate climb to true control. Her husband's heart belonged to another, the dazzling Diane de Poitiers. Catherine swallowed her humiliation like bitter wine. She wore a mask of grace while planting seeds of loyalty among spies, servants, and secret scholars. She built her network, not through love, but through fear and fascination. Even her enemies admired her precision. The French court was a storm of plots, Huguenots and Catholics, dukes and cardinals, all thirsting for power. Catherine stood at the center, unmoved, calculating. She understood one truth better than all her rivals. To survive among wolves, one must become a serpent. Her calm demeanor hid a mind sharpened by paranoia and revenge. Rumors began to circle of her fascination with death. Some said she owned a cabinet of poisons disguised as perfumes. Others whispered that she consulted astrologers before every execution. To her, power was not divine. It was alchemical, a force to be harnessed through fear and spectacle. She was not cruel without reason. To Catherine, punishment was art. Pain was a message, carefully composed and theatrically delivered. It was said that she never raised her voice. Her victims simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but unease in the gilded halls. Servants swore they saw her walking alone at midnight, candles flickering, lips murmuring Latin incantations. Behind her, beauty lay an obsession, control over life and death. She could not bear the thought of betrayal unpunished, yet her cruelty was not mindless. It was crafted with the same care she gave to her jewels and gardens. She once said, "Mercy is a luxury of the secure. I have never been secure." Her chambers were a maze of velvet and mirrors. In one of them, a hidden door led to a private study, a place forbidden to all but a select few. There, beneath oil portraits and celestial charts, she kept her greatest secrets: alchemical manuscripts, vials of mercury, and blueprints drawn by Italian engineers. Visitors described a strange mix of fragrance, roses and something metallic, almost like blood. On her desk rested a miniature glass figure, hollow, human-shaped, and sealed at the ends. It glittered under the candlelight. Few knew its purpose, but those who guessed dared not speak. Catherine's reputation grew beyond the throne. Peasants called her La Reine Noire, the Black Queen. Priests feared her influence on the young King Charles IX, whom she molded like clay. Even the Pope hesitated to cross her. She was said to possess eyes that saw beyond men's souls, capable of sensing lies as one senses a change in the wind. At court banquets, her gaze alone could silence a room. Those who mocked her accent or her Florentine customs found themselves suddenly out of favor, their estates seized, their families erased. Yet she maintained an air of calm civility, hosting grand masquerades and sponsoring artists who painted her as a goddess of wisdom. But in private, Catherine's nightmares betrayed her. She dreamed of shadows pressing against glass, pale faces gasping, hands clawing, eyes begging. She would wake drenched in sweat, whispering prayers in Italian. Her attendants never spoke of it. They simply burned incense and kept the mirrors covered. When the wars of religion bled through France, Catherine's paranoia deepened. She believed her enemies multiplied in secret chambers and churches. She turned to her Italian advisors, men of science and silence. They spoke to her of devices that could hold a man without chains, where breath and time were the only torturers. The Queen listened. She did not dismiss such ideas as madness. To her, innovation was power, even if it was cruel. She saw beauty in mechanisms that punished without blood. To watch an enemy perish slowly, reflected in perfect clarity, it was perhaps the ultimate lesson in control. Whispers began to swirl again. Some said that deep beneath the Louvre, Catherine built a chamber that no servant dared enter. Others spoke of carriages arriving at night, carrying prisoners who never returned. But no one had proof, and only fear and silence. The Queen's eyes betrayed nothing. When ambassadors came, she greeted them with warmth, her hands soft, her words sweet. But those who looked too closely into her gaze often left pale and shaken, as if they had glimpsed something vast and merciless behind her pupils. She surrounded herself with astrologers, like the famed Nostradamus, who spoke to her of destiny written in the stars. But Catherine no longer trusted destiny. She trusted only what she could command and what she could destroy. In her private diary, she once wrote, "Glass is purity. It reveals everything and hides nothing. It imprisons light as I imprison deceit." The line was later struck out, but its ghost remained, faint and deliberate, like a confession. By 1560, France trembled under her influence. Nobles bowed lower, whispers grew quieter, and courtiers watched every word. Catherine had transformed from an underestimated Italian bride into a force of nature, one who ruled through illusion, elegance, and terror. And somewhere beyond the music of the royal ballroom, a secret waited to be revealed, one that glimmered like crystal and smelled faintly of death. For Catherine de Medici, the Queen of Shadows, was ready to give shape to her most exquisite form of punishment, one that would make her name eternal, something born not of fire or blade, but of glass. The year was 1563, and France was a land soaked in tension. The wars of religion had turned neighbor against neighbor, and the court was a nest of serpents disguised in silk. Catherine de Medici sat at its center, her face unreadable, her heart locked behind centuries of Florentine cunning. She had lost too much to be merciful. Her husband was dead, her sons were fragile kings, and her throne was surrounded by enemies who smiled as they sharpened their daggers. It was during those restless months that Catherine's fascination with invention took a darker turn. Among her advisors was Cosimo Ruggieri, an Italian occultist and engineer of morbid genius. Ruggieri had once designed mirrors said to reveal a man's guilt by distorting his reflection. To Catherine, he was more than a sorcerer. He was an artisan of fear. One night beneath the palace gardens, the Queen and Ruggieri descended into a hidden chamber lit by oil lamps. The air smelled of salt and smoke. There, laid upon an oak table, was a structure unlike any other. A coffin made entirely of thick Venetian glass. Its panels gleamed like frozen water, its edges sealed with molten lead. Tiny ventilation holes lined the sides, barely enough to let a person breathe. Catherine studied it in silence. Her gloved hand brushed the transparent surface and a faint smile touched her lips. "It reflects nothing," she murmured. "Only truth." Ruggieri bowed. "It holds a body," he said softly, "but displays a soul." The Queen had found her instrument. It was neither gallows nor guillotine, it was theatre, the slow, visible decay of defiance. The prisoner would lie trapped in a glass box, fully seen yet utterly powerless, their breath fogging the inside as the hours crawled by. No blade, no blood, only air and time. Her first subject was a nobleman accused of plotting against her son, King Charles IX. He was a tall man of proud bearing who believed his title would protect him. Catherine listened to his pleas in her council chamber, her expression one of mild regret. "France must have loyalty," she said, "and loyalty must be witnessed." With a flick of her wrist, she ordered his confinement, not in the dungeon, but in the glass. That night, a handful of guards carried the nobleman through a concealed stairway beneath the Louvre. Few knew such corridors existed, built centuries earlier, now used for the Queen's private justice. The torches burned dim as they entered the subterranean room where the coffin waited, gleaming faintly in the half-dark. The man screamed when he understood. His wrists were bound, his mouth dry with disbelief. The guards forced him inside, and the lid was sealed with iron clasps. He pounded against the glass, but the walls did not yield. The queen stood nearby, unmoved, her face ghostly in the flickering light. "Watch," she said softly. "He breathes yet cannot flee. He sees yet cannot hope. This is truth." Ruggieri nodded, his eyes reflecting the flame. The queen's attendants turned away, trembling. Hours turned to days. The nobleman's breath fogged the glass, his eyes wild, his voice hoarse from shouting. Condensation gathered, blurring his face into a ghostly smear. He clawed at the walls until his fingers bled, the marks of his nails tracing desperate streaks. When the air thinned, he began to gasp, a slow, pitiful rhythm that echoed through the chamber like a heartbeat fading into nothing. Catherine returned once more to look upon him. She stood with her hands clasped, watching the fog thicken on the glass. To her, it was not cruelty, but correction. "He wanted to be remembered," she whispered to Ruggieri. "Now he will be." When death finally claimed him, his body lay still and twisted, the glass reflecting his final horror like a portrait. The queen ordered the coffin sealed permanently and moved to an underground gallery. There she began what courtiers later called the Hall of Glass Tombs. Only a few ever saw it, a vault lit by candles, each flame mirrored endlessly on transparent coffins lined in rows. Inside them lay traitors, spies, and whisperers, preserved in the clarity of their final moments. Some were young women accused of witchcraft, others were lords who had pledged their loyalty to rival houses. To Catherine, they were lessons, not corpses, eternal warnings sculpted in crystal. Soon whispers spread through Paris. Servants claimed to hear muffled cries beneath the palace floors. Gardeners spoke of cold air rising from the ground at night. One maid swore she saw the queen descending alone with a lantern, her white gown glowing in the dark. None dared follow. The queen's fascination deepened. She commissioned artisans from Murano to craft new designs, glass thicker, stronger, and more flawless. Some were shaped to fit the human body with perfection, as if sculpted by a god. Others were built upright, allowing the condemned to die standing, their eyes wide and visible until the very end. Her justification was simple: death must instruct. "The people forget blood," she said to her son, "but they do not forget a face." She believed that fear, when refined, became obedience. Yet even among her council, unease grew. The Duke of Anjou once confronted her in private. "Mother," he said, "you rule with ghosts." Catherine smiled faintly. "Better ghosts than traitors," she replied. Her chambers became temples of reflection. Mirrors covered the walls, but she preferred to stare into glass vessels, watching her own image distort and fade. "It is clarity I seek," she told Ruggieri, "but clarity always costs." When plague struck Paris, Catherine blamed rebellion and impurity. More victims were chosen: courtiers accused of heresy, servants suspected of theft, women rumored to have poisoned rivals. Each met the same fate, sealed in glass, displayed in the hidden vault until their last breath. The process was meticulous. Air holes allowed slow suffocation rather than immediate death. The queen demanded silence during each confinement, no screams, no prayers. Only the faint tap of fingernails against crystal echoed through the chamber, like rain on a coffin. By 1570, the glass coffins had become myth among the court. Some dismissed them as superstition, others as proof of the queen's pact with darkness. But the truth was known to a handful: the guards who carried the bodies, the builders who sealed the lids, and the queen who never looked away. One evening, as the bells of Paris tolled in mourning for yet another nobleman executed for treason, Catherine descended once more into the vault. The air was cold and heavy. She walked slowly, her fingers trailing along the transparent surfaces, each containing a still face distorted by time. In the flicker of torchlight, she paused before one coffin, a woman's body, delicate and pale. Her reflection merged with the dead, two queens facing each other through glass. For a moment, even Catherine felt the chill of her own creation. "Power," she whispered, "is a fragile thing." Then she turned away, her gown whispering across the stone floor, leaving behind only silence and the faint sound of breath where there should have been none. In that silence, the legend grew that Catherine de Medici had found a way to make her enemies immortal, not through memory, but through their suffering, preserved for eternity beneath the palace of the kings. Years passed, and the legend of the glass coffins turned from rumor to dread. Servants refused to enter the lower halls of the Louvre after dusk. They claimed to hear faint tapping, as if ghostly fingers still sought escape from within the crystal tombs. Catherine de Medici, now older, ruled through her sons but trusted no one. Her beauty had hardened into marble, her heart colder than the glass she so admired. As her power waned, the coffins became her only companions. She would descend alone, candle in hand, through winding corridors where time stood still. The vault's air was thick with silence, the walls glimmering faintly with death's reflection. There she would walk among her victims, men who had conspired, women who had deceived, and even a few she had merely feared. Each face looked up at her, eternal and accusing. Some said she spoke to them. "You betrayed France," she would murmur, tracing the glass with her fingertips. "You forced my hand." But sometimes her voice trembled and she whispered, "Or perhaps I betrayed myself." Ruggieri, her old astrologer, warned her that she had gone too far. "Glass breaks, my queen," he said, "and what it holds does not rest." Catherine only smiled. "Then let it break," she answered. "Let them remember who I was." One stormy night in 1589, the queen felt her strength fading. She called for her priest, then dismissed him. "God has no place in this chamber," she said. Instead, she summoned Ruggieri and demanded he show her the stars one final time. Together, they stood before a mirror she had imported from Venice, flawless, cold, and wide as a doorway. As lightning cracked above Paris, her reflection wavered. For a moment, she saw not herself, but dozens of faces, pale, suffocating, pressed against invisible walls, the faces of those she had entombed. She stepped back, clutching her chest, but the image did not fade. The mirror rippled like water, and in its depths the glass coffins seemed to shimmer, as though something inside them had begun to stir. That night, Catherine de Medici died in her chamber, her hand still reaching toward the mirror. When her attendants found her, the glass beside her bed was cracked in a perfect web, as if struck from within. After her death, her secret vault was sealed. The new king ordered it buried beneath layers of stone, declaring it cursed. Yet centuries later, when the Louvre was rebuilt, workers in the foundations claimed to uncover fragments of thick Venetian glass, curved, clear, and impossibly cold to the touch. No bodies were found, only hollow impressions, as if something had once been trapped there and then vanished. Even now, some say that on quiet nights when the Louvre is empty, you can hear faint breaths echoing through the lower halls, and see for a brief moment a woman's reflection watching you from the glass, the queen who made death transparent. Subscribe the channel for more interesting content.